Welcome to Journey Through the Eyes, the EMDR podcast that is here to unveil and explore the transformative power of EMDR therapy. Here at Journey Through the Eyes, our mission is to support clinicians with those critical conversations and the resources about EMDR and other amazing therapies, as well as just those powerful talks for new and seasoned clinicians about how to build your amazing private practice. I am one of your hosts. I'm Tamera J. Brown. I am the CEO and founder of Arise Psychotherapy and Coaching Services here in San Antonio, Texas. And we have an amazing guest, and we want to acknowledge Kathy Couch, who is absent today, but she is here with us in spirit. So we are sending her lots of love and all the good things. And so, what we want you to know today, we want you to get your pencil, your notepad, because whether you are a new or a seasoned professional in a mental health field, we want you to have the confidence and that feeling of competence and knowing which pathways, what tools you can use to help your clients to navigate on their journey of healing and growth. And so today I am having an amazing conversation, and we're going to be talking about cognitive processing therapy. And I have my amazing guest, Miss Heather Chase, with me. And so, Heather, we want to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us on today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And so I'm going to give a little bio and then you will just introduce us to who you are. And so, friends, Heather is a licensed professional counselor and a board certified licensed art therapist. So amazing. And she is in Salem, Oregon, and she primarily treats PTSD using cognitive processing therapy. She also has extensive training in DBT. Oh, Heather, that is going to be delicious. We may have to ask you to come back and talk with us about that. But more recently, she's been providing inference-based CBT for OCD, and she's also an approved clinical supervisor. She is doing some really big and great things, and she owns a small private practice called Salem Trauma Therapy. And so outside of therapy, Heather is the co-founder of a company called Tater Booze, which I thought was really incredible, a food product for endurance for athletes. And so, Heather, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us on today.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Yeah, so incredible. And so, friend, we want to ask you, right? I know for me as a EMDR trained clinician, there's so many different pathways, right, of therapy models that we can
Right.
choose to offer our clients. And I have seen on the famous PESI.
Mhm.
Jesse has always been the go-to for me. And I saw cognitive processing therapy a while back, but I didn't click the button. But I've always been very curious about it. So I want to hear, first of all, how did you land in the therapy model of cognitive processing? And just talk to us a little bit about your journey into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So years ago, I was working at the Oregon State Hospital here in Salem, and I was working on a DBT team. And one of my colleagues had actually been previously working at the VA, where cognitive processing therapy is pretty common. So they shared more information about it, and that's kind of how I started to get excited about it. It's one of those things when you come out of graduate school, at least for me, I felt very underprepared to treat trauma. And I felt like the message was, you need to be really careful and this is a big deal. And that's true. You need to know what you're doing, but I felt underprepared. And so finding a treatment that was pretty structured and pretty straightforward was really helpful for me.
I think that is powerful. I know I resonate with that. For people who follow or tune in to me, that journey through grad school was huge. I'm sure not only for me, for you, but for many people that I didn't feel prepared. I felt like it was like a pot of gumbo.
Mhm.
It was a pot of gumbo. And I can remember being in one of my classes with, there was a fellow student who was treating trauma. And I would hear her say all the, and I was like, well, what is that? Like, what is trauma,
Yeah.
first of all?
Yeah.
And I was doing substance abuse counseling at the time, which we know carries a lot, trauma plays a big part of that. And so, what were you doing before you journeyed into cognitive processing therapy? Were you doing the famous CBT therapy, or what was your model of choice then?
Yeah, so I was really very focused on DBT,
Okay.
and I ended up getting a job, at the state hospital. There already was a DBT team, and it was a pretty exciting time because we actually became the first. I don't know if you're familiar with Marsha Linehan. She's the creator of DBT, but we became the first Linehan certified inpatient DBT program ever at Oregon State Hospital. And so, these folks came in and they grilled us on how we do our treatment, and they like looked at our notes and interviewed clients, and it was very involved. But we were doing the whole full program.
That is incredible. DBT, I did take some DBT skills training and everything. It seems like such a gentle and very intuitive way of helping clients to maneuver through and to learn to cope and all the wonderful things. And so, talk to us a bit about cognitive processing therapy. What is it? And then what do you use? What can it treat? What is it most helpful for?
Yeah, absolutely. So, cognitive processing therapy, it's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's focused on treating trauma. It's what's called a manualized treatment. So,
Mm,
meaning that it's pretty structured and it follows a manual. It's very effective and well researched. It's actually one of, I guess, in the therapy world, there's about three therapies that are considered very much evidence-based treatments for PTSD, and that's EMDR, that's cognitive processing therapy, and prolonged exposure. So CPT is typically provided in 12 sessions, but it can take up to 24 sessions, so there's some flexibility. And I would say that it feels a bit different than what clients might be familiar with in therapy because it is so structured. So that can be a bit of a difference. But something that I think sets CPT apart from other therapies is that it's very much focused on a person's beliefs, and the meaning that they've made from the trauma. So the client isn't required to necessarily go into excruciating detail about the traumatic event, but more so how the trauma has impacted how they see themselves, how they see others, how they see the world. And also, we look at the beliefs around things like safety and trust, power and control, esteem and intimacy. And as far as the treatments, the specific diagnosis or the problems that it's helpful with treating, it really is designed for PTSD. But it can also be helpful for what's called unspecified or other specified trauma related disorders. So those situations when, a client has been through traumatic events, but maybe it doesn't meet the full criteria of PTSD, they can definitely benefit from a treatment like this.
that is incredible. I know that, working with clients, along the journey, I can remember working in community mental health. And we were predominantly using, just basic. I didn't find this out, Heather, till later on that there's, the school book CBT or rational emotive therapies we come out of, and then there's the more advanced, right? And I can remember just one of the CBT models of looking at the thought cycle, you
Mhm.
know, and then how that often would translate into helping the clients look at core beliefs. I'm loving what I'm hearing you share about the cognitive processing because it looks like it really does help the client to journey into those core beliefs and taking a look at, how it's impacting the way they see themselves,
Mhm.
how they see the world, which I think is so powerful. I think that is so powerful, and how they see other people, because that's how we move, right? That's how we move through life and time and share space with other people. And it's kind of happening right at the speed of light. But when we have those, challenges and those adversities that can impact what we think, what we feel, and what we believe about ourselves. Um, I just think that it's phenomenal. When we look at, because sometimes I think, and I want to hear what you feel about this. There are so many people, you know how you can go on Dr. Google and you hear all these things about limiting beliefs,
Mhm.
and you hear about, all these different types of mindsets and limiting beliefs, and people don't sometimes realize the gravity of the
Right.
power of a belief, right? As a therapist who uses CPT processing, what have you come to realize, or, about the power of what we believe about ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. As a cognitive therapist, I absolutely believe that our mindset is so important and that the way that we think about things really shapes reality for us. Um, what's interesting about my role as a CPT therapist is, in a way, I really do have to, I have to kind of come alongside the client and take their perspective in these things. So
Mm,
there's a process called Socratic dialogue, or it might be called Socratic questioning. This idea that the wisdom is within the client, and we just have to like ask the right questions to pull it out of them. But in a way, when I'm using CPT, I'm really trying to almost position myself like, okay, let's consider that these things you're saying are true. Like
mm,
I have to operate from that perspective. If I come in and say, of course this wasn't your fault, or like, this is all wrong. Like, I mean, that's not probably going to go very well. And I'll probably miss some things. So that's kind of an interesting part of the process where I'm more approaching it with a lot of curiosity, kind of help me
mm,
understand this thing. Um, Oftentimes, when a traumatic event happens, it's like we kind of have, we put a wall up and we don't want to think about that thing. And years might go by and we haven't ever really revisited, is this stuff that I'm telling myself actually the case? Is this
mhm.
accurate? Is this really the case? So
I think that is super powerful. I've on the journey now. I've been doing the work of therapy since 2012. And I don't know how you feel about this. It's going to be interesting to hear your feedback. Becoming, the journey of becoming, whichever path of therapist, whether it's CPT, EMDR, whatever we're doing, right? It's like there's no real way to prepare yourself. It really is an experiential journey,
mhm,
right? And the thing that I love that you just shared is how, as a therapist who is doing cognitive processing therapy, you learn to be with the client and to really tune in and to
mhm,
step into their universe, right? And to
yeah,
press pause on whatever personal beliefs, judgments, or whatever that you may be holding, in order to really better understand where your client is coming from. I know for me at this time in my life, I see how critical that is. I can't tell you how many times I came in completely unaware, listening to them talk about their thoughts. And it's like, okay, no, that's wrong. That's why you're feeling, all
right,
the
right.
things, right? That's why you don't, oh
Yeah, we
my
want them to
gosh.
feel better.
Yeah, and approaching it, if we can really ride the wave of that, because I think that is incredible. Approaching the therapy sessions with just wanting the client to feel better, not realizing that um, if I'm approaching therapy with thinking that I'm going to be trying to fix them, and I'm going to be trying to do something else other than taking the journey of being with them and listening to the narrative, listening to the story that they are telling themselves, and then holding that incredible space that validates, right? And
Right.
then creates that opportunity to lean into that inner wisdom. I think that's amazing. I want to ask a juicy question. What do you have to do, Heather? Right? What do you do to prepare yourself to be able to hear and to share that space with the clients as a CPT therapist? What do you do? What do you got to do to attune to that?
I think that's such a great question. Um, I think it's something that can come up a lot for therapists in general, right? There's
Mhm.
like an emotional labor to what we do. For me, there's a few things. One of the first things is that I try to stay focused on the symptoms and not get
Mhm.
pulled into the story. And that might
Ooh.
sound kind of cold, but if I get pulled into the story, I can't help the client. So I really try to
Mm.
focus on like what are the symptoms that I'm seeing and not pulled into the story. But also, I think there's something about, and I'm sure that I've seen research on this topic. There's something about providing an evidence-based treatment that really reduces therapist burnout. Um, when you see clients getting better, when you see them improve, when you're providing such a focused treatment that is very structured, I know exactly what to do. I go into session number 4. I know what to do.
Mm.
I'm not like feeling completely lost. I have a really great framework that I'm working from. So I think that really helps to um, keep me motivated. I
Mhm.
can really ground myself in that. And other than that, I also I keep a smaller caseload. It's important to me to have things going on outside of therapy. Currently,
Mhm.
I'm working and seeing clients 4 days a week, but in the summer, I go to 3 days a week. So
Mhm.
those are some things that I do to kind of try to take care of myself.
I love that, Heather, because, so many juicy things you just shared with us. And this is why Kathy and our intention is to really have these critical conversations for both the new and the seasoned clinicians. New clinicians who are on their journey of becoming and wanting to have these conversations on what does a self-care, what does that choice point of what does it really look like, okay, in a realistic way, and what are those necessary things you got to do to be able to take care of yourself that really do work, right?
Mhm,
I loved how you talked about the evidence-based treatment.
mhm.
um Before, you know and I say that I get it, right? When we're leaving out of grad school, we're just, to me it looks like a funnel of just bunch of information that we're swallowing, that our
Yeah,
brains are eating, and we're just taking in, and we don't really have a lot of space to process it all. It's just okay.
right.
And recognizing the identity of who we're going to become and who we need to be for the people we're going to serve. Sometimes I don't think there's a lot of space held for that. And
Mhm,
so we journey into providing whatever book form, whatever we get introduced to, and then we're trying to use and we're fumbling. We're fumbling and we don't know where to start. We don't know where we are. We don't know. And why, hence, we will sometimes hear so many people talk about how talk therapy didn't work for them, didn't serve them. And when, I don't know if you've heard that before, but I've had so many clients that are like, is this going to be different? Because, of course, EMDR, much uh, what I'm hearing from you about cognitive processing, is structured.
mhm.
And that's what helped me to ground.
Yeah.
It gave me that map, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking, there's a lot of challenges for new therapists coming out of school. I think a lot of us get into the field because, we want to help people, and maybe we were natural helpers in our lives before all of this. And when you come out of school, yeah, there's so much information that you're taking in. And usually you're working with a population right out of school that can be very many different types of problems. So you never really feel like an expert at any particular thing. And it might be clients that need a lot more support or community mental health, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's also a lot of pressure, around, there's a lot of things that we learn about that we should not do as therapists, which is so important,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
can make us feel really anxious when we're new at it. So um, yeah, but really, I believe that a lot of new therapists, whether they understand all of these treatments or not, there's a lot of really important soft skills that they
Mhm.
have, and
Mhm.
that's really, something to lean on when you're a new therapist.
Oh, I love that. Talk to us a bit, and let's just hold space, right, for those soft skills. What are some of those soft skills that you would say a new and even a seasoned clinician can lean on that can support them? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just being a good listener and being validating and being present with a client. Um, there's a pressure to solve the problem.
Mhm.
And when clients come to us with a lot of distress, right? It's like, I don't want them to be distressed. I need to figure out how to fix this
Mhm.
situation right away. And they may have been struggling with this problem for years, so it's okay to kind of wait and get to know them and learn more about the problem and kind of be with them. And it's okay to not know, because there's a lot of, it's like there's a lot of things that are happening in the therapy, even if you're not exactly sure how you're going to write about that on a note or whatever. Like, what is the
Mhm.
intervention I'm using? Like, you're probably still doing multiple things in that moment.
Mhm. I think that's incredible, Heather, and I can appreciate that, and I'm sure those who will listen to this podcast can also appreciate that as well, right? Leaning into those soft skills of being a good listener, and validating. And one of the things I've learned this year more so is how to share with my clients that coming to therapy is not the quick fix,
Right.
and that we're here to not just have the sessions. I know my practice. I love working with clients who are ready to take the journey of healing and growth and
Mhm.
learning to live well. So clients who want quick, I'm just coming for the day. I don't particularly serve that population of clients because I do believe in it takes time to get to know who you are working with. That's that case conceptualization, right? Figuring out, tuning in, and listening. And that takes a lot of time. And so, how do you handle when you do have a client that comes in and they're in that fix me right now? Fix me, I want to be better. I've come to you 3 times and I'm still.
You know, I don't say this to every client, but I will tell some clients going through trauma is sort of like um, you were a cucumber and you got turned into a pickle, and you're never going to be a cucumber again. You're a pickle now.
Can we just
And
breathe that in? Hold on. I cannot let you sleep. We cannot. That is incredible. Oh my gosh. And why am I saying that, Heather? Because a lot of times human beings who don't understand trauma and how it changes them, like, you can go into different communities. Um, I work with clients who are people of faith. right?
Mhm.
Coming from different religions, different ones, more so Christian in the Christian religion. And many of them have a difficult time recognizing how what they went through changed them,
Yeah.
you know? And so how do you, the pickle, you were a cucumber, now you're a pickle.
Yeah. Yeah. You're a pickle now and you're not going to be a cucumber again. But the good news is that people like pickles
I
and
love
pickles
that.
can have really great lives, so it can be really painful to want to be a cucumber and that's not going to happen, but you can still have a really good life.
I got a juicy question from the lens of CPT, cognitive processing therapy. What are some critical things, adversities that can cause a human being who is a pickle, who is a cucumber, to become a cucumber? A pickle. Hold on. What are those critical things? What are some critical things that can cause a cucumber to transform into a pickle?
Yeah, yeah. This is a great question because personally I have sort of my feelings about the DSM and how that's the structure that we have to, or maybe we don't have to operate under, but when you take insurance, that sort of thing. Um, so, from the CPT perspective, this is a treatment for PTSD, and PTSD does not come from 500 traumas, it comes from one trauma. So, even if you've had 500 traumas in your life, there's one trauma that caused the PTSD. And that trauma has to fit into that PTSD criteria, being this is actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. And there's some other things they've added as far as, if you, for example, if you work in the military and you fly the drones that drop the bombs, you're exposed to trauma even though you're maybe physically safe. But it has to be part of your job. So what I what difficulty I have with all of this is that this isn't usually how life works. A lot of clients come with multiple traumas across the lifespan, and there may be a lot of things that bother them, and it may not always be clear what quote unquote caused the PTSD. We
Mhm.
do know that trauma compounds over time. So if you experience trauma as a child, a lot of children can be very resilient and kind of come through that, and they can do okay as adults. But if you go through a trauma as a child and then as a young adult you have a new trauma, you're more likely to develop PTSD at that time compared to someone who had a healthy childhood. It's
Mhm.
like a dam that can't hold it back anymore. So it does compound over time. And we also know that the rate of PTSD increases when the trauma was relational. It's someone you trusted,
Mhm.
intimate partner violence, domestic violence, that sort of thing, versus a natural disaster where it's kind of just like this act of God that happened.
Wow. I think that the, when it comes to the DSM, like you're saying, one of the things that I'm learning and that EMDR has gifted me with is, we look at the symptoms the client is coming with and recognizing that they're more than the categories or the labels that are often placed on them. And we want to look at those things and try to find the origin. And sometimes for clients, I meet clients who come in, oh my gosh, Heather, and they'll tell me, I had a client come tell me, yeah, I drowned when I was 7. But my parents prayed I'm all good. And like that they describe how they were gone, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my gosh, at 7 years old. Or I'll
Right.
have a client who doesn't come from the best neighborhood. And they'll say, yeah, when I was 16, we were in a store and it was robbed. And the robbers had us on the floor, and they have no idea,
Mhm.
you know, how that's the reason why they don't like being in certain stores, or they go certain places and all of a sudden they mood change and they're going through
Yeah.
all of these different changes. Um, and I am just so grateful that we have therapy models
Mhm.
that can really, really help
Right.
clients. First of all, let me ask this, like with cognitive processing therapy, because with EMDR, there's three prongs, right? Three focuses, which is the past, the present, and the future. And
Mhm.
then we navigate through that, through those eight critical steps, phases,
Mhm.
right? That we kind of
Right.
rinse and repeat. Um, what does that look like in cognitive processing therapy? Like, do you go through a phase where you're providing case conceptualization, psychoeducation, for the clients, especially someone who has PTSD?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically, before starting CPT, if a brand new person comes to me, um, we might have a couple of sessions of just getting to know each other and gathering history and the intake type stuff before we start CPT. Although some of the clinics that are really, the creators of CPT, the co-creator, like they might do an intake and then next session they're starting. So they get started
Mm,
pretty quickly. Um, so the first the first session is heavily focused on psychoeducation, talking about it's a lot of the therapist is doing most of the talking in that meeting. Um, we're going over the DSM criteria of PTSD, explaining more about those symptom clusters, um, some of the information about cognitive theory, and this basis of CPT, there's this idea that the world is just and fair. So we talk a lot about this they call it the just world myth, and how, growing up, it's sort of how we're taught right from wrong. Like if you do
mhm,
something bad could happen. Like if you're a good person, good things will happen. And as we get older, we kind of learn that that's not really the case.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
we might know someone who is a wonderful person and something awful happens to them, and we're just like, they don't deserve this. So, so we teach them about this idea of the just world belief, the just world myth, cognitive theory. We talk about emotions. In CPT, the term natural emotions and manufactured emotions are used. It's very similar to primary and secondary emotions. And then there's an assignment given in that first session to write a one-page impact statement on why you believe your most distressing event occurred. So, so the first session, there's a lot of information given to the client, and after that, there's worksheets each week. And during the first half of treatment, the worksheets start out as very simple. It starts out with it's called the ABC sheet, but it's essentially, the event, the emotion, the event, the thought, and the emotion, the CBT
mhm,
triangle stuff, right? And the worksheets get progressively more and more complex as we go through the treatment. So about halfway through the treatment, um, there's a very involved worksheet that really helps break down what are called stuck points. So these are the thoughts or the beliefs that a person has, and throughout the course of treatment, even before, we formulate what's called a stuck point log. We track those thoughts they have. These could be common examples are things like no one can be trusted, no place is safe. If I had turned left instead of right, my friend, we wouldn't have been in that car accident. My friend would have survived.
mhm,
So there's stuck points that are about the event itself. And then there's stuck points about everything else, the more
mm.
general kind of things. So that's sort of a quick overview. And then, of course, we're tracking the symptoms through the PTSD checklist, the PCL-5. So that's given at every session, and we're looking at that at the beginning of the session.
I love it. And I'm like, I know that there are a lot of people who, there's some who like to freelance therapy,
Yes.
and I I like the wiggle room that once we can journey into a evidence-based model, right, and learn it and begin to master the skill and leaving room for continuing to be a student of it, that we can learn how to be flexible, right,
Mhm.
with what we're doing and tailor those services to the client's needs. But I love the structure because to me, it gives me that feeling of we're providing actual treatment
Mhm.
and we're taking a journey, even though that journey isn't linear, but we
Mhm.
can always say, okay, this is where we are. Okay, this is where we are, and we have that. One of the things that I love that you're talking about, right, that just is incredible to me is the whole emotional things. Like I've never heard of that. You said it was manufactured emotions and
Mhm.
then,
Natural emotions. So natural emotions might be very similar to primary emotions.
okay.
These are the emotions that we all they're hardwired into us, right? They're like tied to that fight or flight system. Um, Things like fear, grief. So I might explain to a person, let's say my grandmother passes away, assuming that we have a good relationship, like what emotions do you think I might feel?
Mhm,
I could feel grief and sadness without even having to think about it. So it's like this event happens and the emotion is just automatic. But if I start to have thoughts about that event, I didn't
mm,
visit last holiday. I didn't call enough. I should have been there more. Now I'm going to have a different type of emotion. Like
mhm,
what kind of emotion is that? And it's like,
mm,
well, shame or guilt or, maybe anger at myself. So those are manufactured emotions. And I think of them as um, it's like there's a little factory in our brain that's like, like you're not good enough. It's like cranking out these
mhm,
stuck points. And those are the things that really keep us stuck, right? And through having these thoughts like I should have been there and I didn't do enough and I didn't call at her birthday or whatever. Um, I'm preventing myself from experiencing the feelings of grief and sadness, which can run their course. That's a natural emotion. It can run its course. But when we feel manufactured emotions, those really stick around.
wow. I mean, I find that so interesting. Now, here's my juicy question, right? Well, I got two, but we'll see. The first thing that I wanted to ask is when you're doing cognitive processing, like how you talked about the fight or flight system, right? Is there any form, like with EMDR, for example, when we get into phase three, which is where we've already collected all of our memories and we've got a target that we're working on or a memory we're working on, once we assess that memory, or it's in my view, it's turned on and it's activated, clients will sometimes have very strong and intense emotions that come up
Mm.
with the negative cognition that comes along with that, right?
Yeah.
And then we're using what EMDR calls bilateral stimulation to
Mm.
desensitize that particular memory, right? What does cognitive processing therapy do to help the clients who are, let's say, they're in that fight or flight system in the session and they become angry or irritable or just that, space of being able to be present and connect is leaving them, right? What do you all do to help the client to maneuver through that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think a lot of the clients that I see, they are experiencing, you know, that distress sort of all the time.
Mm, mhm,
Um, and I think it's part of how the treatment is structured that we aren't there is a goal to process emotions and to have this natural expression of emotions. But yeah, that's a really great question because I wouldn't say that clients necessarily become angry or the goal is not for them to necessarily feel upset in session.
mhm.
Um, yeah, that's one that I might have to think about more.
I love that. And because it's like, well, with EMDR, right? Because we're targeting the memory. And then
Mhm,
so here's my next juicy question, right? Is polyvagal, like, you
mhm,
know, if and I'm just don't want to make assumptions, or do you journey or study anything about
mhm.
polyvagal theory? Okay.
No.
So looking at how polyvagal theory just basically helps us to understand just the nervous system in the brain and how a lot of the yuck stuff,
Mhm,
right? How
mhm,
a lot of the stuff that clients are dealing with are kind of funneling through there. And when we're doing EMDR therapy, we're really helping them, through the lens of Dr. Shapiro's theory
mhm,
on how that REM sleep movement helps
mhm.
for whatever reason. I think she was
Right.
just incredible to help kind of, in a sense, it's like this is not a good uh, a soft idea, but it's like Drano, like when your sink is clogged up, you go get the
Yeah.
liquid Drano to kind of get the
Yeah.
yuck stuff
Yeah.
out of there. And so EMDR in some senses helps the client to kind of maneuver and navigate that way, just
Right.
getting the yuck stuff, like that massage of the actual nervous system and getting
Mhm.
all that out. And
Yeah.
so I'm very interested in hearing, right, what is the difference between CPT and CBT?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and one of the other things I want to mention, I think with CPT, the part of the theory is that when our amygdala, is
Mhm,
firing the fight or flight system, the prefrontal cortex is very much tamped down, and vice
mhm,
versa, that they have this circular relationship. So if
mhm,
we can activate one, the other becomes more tamped down.
mhm.
This is like, I think of how when someone is having a panic attack and you ask them, what's your phone number? Or what,
Right,
name all
right,
the
right.
types of dogs you can think of. We're activating the prefrontal cortex and calming down the amygdala. So I think of it
Mhm,
when we're going through the worksheets and doing it in this really structured, kind of very logic
mhm.
focused way. Um, I think that's part of the theory of what's happening there, is
Love
that we're
that.
activating the prefrontal cortex, and in doing that, the fight or flight system is getting tamped down.
I love that. I'm such a nerd when it comes to the brain and just our prefrontal cortex. It's just a
Yeah,
phenomenal. The
yeah,
brain is a phenomenal organ,
right. And there's so much that we don't know.
And I don't want to get on my soapbox, but I just think that our education system needs to do something new with
Yeah,
helping kids in all grade schools to better understand the organ that they're
right.
working with,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's at the source of everything we're doing every day. Anywho,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
what would
yeah.
you
So,
say? Go ahead. Yeah.
oh, I was going to say, you had asked about CBT versus
Hmm.
CPT, which it's interesting because a lot of my clients, when they tell their other providers, their med providers, I'm doing CPT, they're like, oh, you mean CBT? Because so many people haven't heard of CPT. Um, Anyhow, cognitive behavior therapy is, I think of it as like the largest religion in the world of psychotherapy, right? This
Hmm.
is um, just this huge umbrella. It's kind of the thing that we all learn about in school. And there's so many branches off of that tree.
Hmm.
And cognitive processing therapy is a branch off of that tree. So,
Okay.
and the difference being, cognitive behavior therapy, there's so many ways you could use it, and it could kind of be sprinkled in wherever. Whereas CPT is a very specific protocol
Okay.
for
Would you
PTSD. Yeah.
would you dare to say, because now I started out cognitive behavioral therapy, but just the books.
Mm.
And then I started, like, it was like not going anywhere. It was like, okay, clients, okay, either I'm doing something wrong or what's going on here. But this basic of the thought process, clients were still in that emotional
Yeah.
stuckness, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
And then I ventured into the neuroscience form and the mindfulness form of CBT, which helped to better understand the brain and the body. And then I fell in love with that, right?
Mhm.
Because then it started making sense and really helped back to that soft skill. You gave me a gift today, back to that soft skill of validating. I've been able to validate clients who
Mhm.
are having, I mean, all the things, right? But then recognizing your brain and your nervous system and doing what it's supposed to do for you and validating the anxiety and all the stuff, right? But then it also, you know, it was like when clients, for example, or would you say CPT, does CPT allow you as a therapist to take a deeper, more focused dive into what the client is coming to get help with?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's yeah, I do think that it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sound, I think people, for especially for uh new clinicians, right? You know how your client can come in, and I don't know how you do it with CBT, but clients will come in and they got like three goals. I'll say let's look at three goals, three ways you want to be different after our journey together. Some clients will come in and they'll have about five, six things that they're trying to work through. And it's like, hold on, okay, let's kind of narrow it down so we can really have something that we can actually accomplish, right? And so that we can really hone into that focus,
Mhm.
in therapy. And it just sounds like with the way you're describing cognitive processing therapy, because I know even still today, when I try to do talk therapy and CBT,
Mhm.
this story,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
get dragged in.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So with CPT, does it help? Can it help to just really hone in and not get lost in the narrative or in the story?
I think it absolutely can because we're really prioritizing. I talked about the stuck point log and how we're tracking
Mhm.
the beliefs that a person has. We really prioritize the stuck points that are about that specific event. So,
Mm.
for example, a person may have a lot of more overgeneralized, no place is safe, no one can be trusted type of stuck points, or, I'm a horrible person, no one likes me. And if I try to work with them on those, that can get pretty tricky because
Mhm.
they have these stuck points about the event that are holding up these more general stuck points. So, for example, it's like, well, of course, I'm a horrible person and no one likes me. I did this thing that
Mm.
I'm at fault for, you know? So, it's the way that it's structured really helps to, we prioritize the stuck points about the event.
Mhm.
And a lot of these more general problems, these general beliefs, kind of resolve a lot of
I
times on their
love
own
that.
because you're taking care of like the self-blame. And sometimes, clients they may say, I don't have self-blame, I know it wasn't my fault, but they might have the coulda, woulda, shouldas.
Mm.
They might say other things that to me I'm hearing, this is like another, like there's some self-blame here.
Mhm. I love that. You know, I love hearing you talk about how CBT really helps in especially helping clients to reframe those stuck points. And if you can hone in and address that, then some of the other stuff that is connected to it resolves and heals itself too. Kind of
Right.
reminds me of EMDR therapy. Once we're working with one memory,
Hmm.
whatever's connected to that, even if it doesn't come out in our treatment plan, those things tend to heal as well, which
Yeah.
helps EMDR to be the rapid healing that it can give. What I want to hear from you is, who would be a good candidate for CPT, and then who are clients that wouldn't be a great candidate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So PTSD is really the thing that this treatment has been studied for. So it's important that a client meets that criteria. If they don't meet that criteria, that's okay. They say there's a few things to kind of look for in that case. If a person is reporting traumatic events or self-blame, and on the PCL, they're noting a lot of symptoms, that's usually what I'm looking for. So, for example, a person might have gone through a really bad divorce, or they might have been laid off from a job. That was actually a
Mhm.
pretty common one around the time of COVID. Sometimes, there's people who lost their job, and it's more devastating. They present with as many symptoms as a person who's had a PTSD qualifying event.
Mhm.
So when there's self-blame, that's one of the things that I really listen for. And when they have a lot of negative thoughts
Okay.
about the trauma, I think it could be more of a challenge if a client, is like, I don't know, I don't remember the trauma, but I know something happened and I feel anxious. Then I might be like, this could be tough.
Okay.
Um, so that's kind of who I think of it as being for. And it's also really important. This is one of the things I think is different between, among other things, different between EMDR and CPT is it's really important for clients to do the practice assignments.
Mm.
And CPT, the people who tend to get better are the people who prioritize the assignments. So
Wow.
that's the number. It's so important. And yeah, if someone's not doing the assignments and not, and then they're not getting better, it's like I kind of hold their feet to the fire on that, because I don't want a person to have a negative experience and then believe that nothing's ever going to work. And really,
Mm.
it's like you didn't get the full dose of the treatment.
I love that because one thing for me, and I'm learning how to integrate these things in my private practice, is because I believe and I share with my clients, I say, I always have a standard when I'm working with clients. I said, but I don't project or put that standard on you. But what I do look for is clients who are willing to invest and
Mhm.
to really honor their journey and do the work. And I love when clients are able to do those assignments that help them to gain the clarity. Don't just wait till you come to me. Let's
Mhm.
take a look and let's make sure you're invested and you're doing the work of healing, so that you can take what I call the gold dust from the dark stuff you've been through. Let's find the gold nuggets. Let's find the gold stuff so you can build a beautiful, amazing, and a bright light for yourself. So I love hearing that CBT really navigates and puts that in front of the client to get them as an active participant, it sounds like, in the work, right, in the healing journey. And so, Heather, you have been awesome and incredible. And this has been a very enlightening. Now I'm all intrigued. Okay. I'm all like, whoa, okay. So I want to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about your practice, where people can find you, or where do they need to go? Because a lot of people don't know about CPT and what you would suggest they begin to do if this is a therapy that could really be helpful and beneficial for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So my practice is called Salem Trauma Therapy, and it's just salemtraumatherapy.com.
Mhm.
I'm completely virtual at the moment. I am licensed in Oregon and Washington. And yeah, there's some information on there to check out, but outside of that, I don't know if you've heard of the podcast This American Life.
Okay.
Have you heard of
No,
this? So
no.
this American Life is an NPR podcast, and they have a really wonderful episode called 10 Sessions. And it's actually an NPR reporter who had PTSD and went through cognitive processing therapy, and she recorded the sessions. So it's 10 sessions because she did an accelerated version where she did it over the course of 2 weeks.
Hmm.
And folks who are maybe curious about CPT but aren't quite sure, it's a great resource to listen to, kind of how the sessions work, what it's like, what to expect. So 10 sessions by This American Life, I definitely recommend.
Awesome.
And also there's a website called cpt4ptsd.com. Those are the CPT people. Those are a lot of the people from the VA, the people who do the training. For a therapist, once you go through the training and you participate in a 6-month consultation group, you can be placed on the directory. So they have a directory on that website where you can find a provider who's gone through that process and is, considered an approved CPT provider.
Awesome. So I hope that our listeners have had their pencil, their notepad. Heather, you have been incredible, and I thank you so much. And again, folks, you all can visit and find Heather. Go to her amazing website. And what is it again, Heather?
SalemTraumatherapy.com.
And so we are thanking you all, thanking Heather, thanking her for sharing her passion and all the things that she's doing. And we here at Journey Through the Eyes, we're here to share the stories, the therapy models, and just those critical conversations to inspire both new and seasoned clinicians. And we're hoping that our listening audience have, gained some tools and some information as well as for our clients and people who are looking to get on their journey of health and wellness and looking for a therapy model that can serve them. CPT definitely sounds like something that can be beneficial. Okay. And so we want to thank you all for joining us here at Journey Through the Eyes. Anything you want to say, any last words you want to say to our audience?
Thank you so much for having me.
You are incredible. And so don't forget to press the like, the share, and to share this out with someone else you think that can be encouraged and inspired by this broadcast. And we will be seeing you again next Friday. Have an amazing day.